Hi, Claire. Welcome.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've met with you so many times in this Zoom room, but now it's we're doing something new.
We are. Yes, it's exciting. Thanks
Yeah,
for creating that space.
my pleasure. So for those listening, the intention of this interview is to give some more information on a course that Claire is offering. One of It's been a long time since you've done a course in English, correct?
Yeah. I don't actually remember when the last time was, since I moved to France in 2020. So yeah, it's been a while for sure.
Hmm. And the topic is thriving in relationships. And
Mhm.
there will be all kinds of the details about that in the description wherever you're listening to this. And Claire is very busy, so we're going to jump right into it and ask some questions, starting with what brings you to healing work?
Yeah, that's a really good question and not one necessarily that's obvious to answer. I think maybe simply, the desire to feel better at first, just for myself, just like the really feeling like surely there is a way for more peace inside. Um, I've always been very interested in people and always also been very much of an optimist, like thinking that, surely we can do something about this. Like we can express ourselves authentically, we can connect in a way that feels nourishing. And you know I've seen so many people, myself included, feeling really frustrated when that's, for whatever reason we can't get there. And also it's such a reward when we do get there. So I think, it's first experiencing it for myself, being like, oh wow, I went from there to here, or to there to there. And then also then helping other people and witnessing them feeling, going from like stuck to like, oh, there is more ease, like, oh, this feels good, like that's that's really something that feels good to me.
And when I met you, I hope you don't mind me mentioning you were a programmer, right? You were doing computer programming, or you were
uh,
just out of that career, perhaps.
yeah, I was working in a tech company, so that's way back in 2013. I think I quit that job. I was working for a tech company, and I was actually more in the marketing side of things. I was also coding. I mean, I knew, I knew the more tech part of the work because I had to. But yeah, that's a while back
Yeah, quite a pivot from that world into this.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, next question, what is the relationship between one's inner peace and the peace that they experience in relationship?
Well, they kind of go hand in hand, right? Like to some degree, to feel everything is a matter of relationships. So it all starts with yourself, right? We all have like different parts inside of ourselves. We have more vulnerable parts, and then we have parts that protect those vulnerabilities. And then we have parts that maybe feel more associated to like, our identity. And so it's not just like Adam or Claire or, like we have a multitude of personalities inside of us. And if we don't have, before we even engage in relationship, if we don't have some sense of like inner peace or harmony or communication inside of ourselves, then it's a lot harder to have that inner peace with someone else's system. So that's, to me, that's the connection, right? Like it starts with like how I can be in a relationship with my own parts, with my own vulnerabilities, especially. And then from that place, it's much easier to relate to someone else and all that's going on for them.
Right. And do you have, my sense is that this is not a simple answer, but maybe you have some tips on for how a person can decide when they maybe need to do more inner work versus getting into a relationship where they themselves don't feel inner peace to a certain level, and perhaps the other person doesn't either, and then it's more difficult.
Mhm. Is your question like should I be single because I feel like I have too much inner work to do, or is it okay to get in a relationship? Is that what I'm
Yes.
hearing?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's always okay to get in a relationship. I think, there is no such thing as like, oh, I'm too messed up. I can't possibly be in a relationship. I think, and what I was trying to say before is that the more you work on yourself, the easier it's gonna feel to relate to someone else. But I don't think anyone should ever feel like they're not good enough to be in a relationship. And being single or being in a relationship, we learn different things, right? And I think the beauty of being in a relationship is also that there are things you can learn about yourself in a relationship that are just not available when you're on your own.
Hmm.
So, right, because it doesn't trigger your attachment in the same way. Like there are all sorts of things that happen when you relate to someone and when there is the vulnerability of connection. Like I have clients that, can feel really, really strong when they're single. And then when they're partnered, some vulnerabilities flare up that are, and suddenly it feels much harder to be them.
And even in the interim, in the dating process, it's immediately so, especially
Right.
now with
Challenging.
online dating and
Yeah.
yeah. I like what I'm understanding, and from having worked with you for a long time, but what I'm also hearing is that there's also a sense of self-compassion. Like I deserve to be in a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and yeah, I think not everybody feels that. Um, and some people might also come to the conclusion that they don't deserve to be in a relationship because they have a hard time maintaining one. So yeah, being in a relationship feels like a birthright to me. We're social creatures in the way that when we're born, we are dependent on our caregiver to simply survive, right? And that very first relationship kind of gives the imprint for how we're going to be in a relationship as adults. Of course, it's also not like, if it goes well when you're a baby, then it's going to go well when you're an adult, or if it goes poorly when you're a child, it's going to be terrible when you're a grown up. Like it's not that simple. But there are a lot of things that happen in childhood that sets a blueprint for how you're going to react as an adult in a relationship. And because we come to this earth, primed to be relating to others, it's natural to me that, it's everyone deserves to be in a relationship. Like there is something deeply nourishing about just relating to others.
Well said. Uh, so why is it sometimes hard to do what one knows logically is best or healthy?
I think again, it goes back to our history and our childhood primarily. So there is a big difference between what feels good and what's familiar. And I think people get tricked about that. Like, especially people who have more of a history of abuse or neglect tend to be attracted or have this, yeah, they tend to be attracted by what they know, and is that the word? It looks like it feels good, but it's just that it's something that feels familiar.
Hmm.
And I think it's really a skill to develop, that especially for people with those kind of vulnerabilities from childhood. Like, is this something that I know and that's why I'm drawn to it, or is it something that is good for me? And what can be frustrating is that the things that are actually good for me, sometimes there's really a rewiring that needs to happen. Like it doesn't feel as rewarding or as attractive. Um, but that can change with time.
And even as you said earlier, it can be quite confronting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how can one broach the subject of seeking help, whether that's therapy or coaching, to their loved one if they're in a partnership?
Ah, that's tricky. So here you're talking specifically about a partner asking someone in a partnership asking their partner to go to couples therapy or to go to therapy themselves.
Um, I even more simply than that, I'm thinking of a lot of my experience of observing couples, my experience in relationships. Sometimes it's too easy to just coast and assume that everything's okay until it
Mm-hmm.
and
Right,
to have to, whether it's an issue of courage or language, to be able to say, you know, there are some things coming up that are not working, and I would like to seek some outside help. Or
right.
how would you approach that conversation? What would you advice would you give? Maybe somebody's afraid that their partner is going to blow up or think that they're not enough, etc.
Well, I think for me, the wanting to go to couples counseling or to look for some help is really a sign of I'm invested in this relationship, right? I it matters to me, and because it matters to me, I want to make sure that we're on the right tracks. That's kind of, how I would approach it. Another thing is also that, and I see this a little bit more in France than in the US, but I think it's everywhere nonetheless. Unfortunately, I find that couples come to therapy, tend to come to therapy too late when it's like a really, really bad. There's a bit of a stigma of like, why would we go to couples therapy if it's just that, some things are not quite right, but like overall it's fine. Like, people wait to be like, I was seeing this couple yesterday and they've been together for 20 years and it's been bad for 15 and really bad for 10. And you know, I don't know I don't know what we'll be able to do, but well, if it's been really bad for 10 years, that's a lot of time for it to be really bad. And it makes it a lot harder in therapy to be able to actually move the needle towards thriving, towards being happy, healthy together.
Mm. Yeah, I would imagine from a therapist's perspective, sometimes you might just be there to give them permission to separate.
Yeah, totally. My role as a therapist is not to have people stick together just no matter what. It's to make sure that people are where they need to be and that they're doing well, together if they can, but individually for sure.
Yeah. And I'm actually going to switch the order of the questions since you just mentioned that. That together, no matter what, is kind of a traditional mentality back in the world of marriage. Was uh, this was this formal agreement between families, and you're combining, you know, property. There was just a lot more complicated in many ways, and in other ways, it's more complicated in the modern version where there's this whole world of relating and sexuality and eros is changing very fast. We've got ethical non-monogamy, polyamory, whatever you want to call that. Some
Mhm.
people still trying to do monogamy, other people monogamish, and that old kind of mentality, at least for myself, I still notice, even though I've been very progressive since I was a kid, I still have a lot of that programming, uh, like what you just mentioned, like I'm holding on to this relationship for dear life, even though years can go by and it's not serving me.
Right.
So my question is, um, have you noticed that there's really fundamental differences in between partners that are in more traditional monogamous relationships versus the newer styles of relating, ethical non-monogamy?
You mean in terms of like being in it for life kind of thing? Is that what you mean?
Like when they come to you and they've got issues that come up, are they more or less the same issues? Like, this person's not listening to me, or are they different?
I think they're both. They're both, some are the same and some are different. I think there's a lot of the same things nonetheless, because at the core, it's very much about like what really matters in a relationship is like, do I feel seen and understood, and can I be myself, right? Can I be myself authentically, and do you still love me if I'm fully myself, right? I think at the heart of being in a relationship there is that, whether it's like a monogamous relationship or any other kind of scenario. So I think a lot of the things that we see in couples therapy are about, you know, being able to like see each other and see each other in our vulnerabilities and still stick around. It's a lot about, you know, when I see couples that are stuck, it's a lot about their protective systems being at war, right? So if you think of it, you have like the exiles, like the vulnerable parts, and then there are the parts that protect our vulnerabilities, right? And people who are stuck the most usually are right there. Like it's the war of those parts that are just the defensive part and the angry part, and right, it's not the vulnerable parts that are at war with each other. So that's just something that you see across the board with like all relationships. Then things that are different, I think, in terms of like monogamous versus polyamorous or other scenarios, are more around, you know, jealousy and contracts. And I think communication obviously is important no matter what, but it's even more important to be like so clear and transparent, and you know, with and have like boundaries and be precise when you're in a in a relationship that is very specific to you.
Well put. Yeah, because there are so many
Right, because yeah.
kitchen table poly versus, I don't know what the other one is, but like,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it's a fast changing world out there.
Mm.
Uh, yeah. And then my last question. What advice would you give to somebody that, let's say they're not able for some reason to get into a long-ish term relationship. It cuts off after a few dates or after a few weeks, and particularly if it's a repeating pattern, whether it's
Right,
one night stands or one date, or they keep getting ghosted, etc.
right. Few things. The first one is I would get really curious and maybe see if the people who are, you know, either ghosting or stopping the relationship are willing to maybe give me a little hint about, you know, what's happening for them. Since they're not going to see me anymore, you know, and it's this thing that keeps on happening. If I'm willing to hear what they might have to say, you know, maybe someone will have the honesty or the courage to let me know something that, you know, turned them off. Or so that's one way maybe that I could look at it. Another one would be to also simply um one like go inside and start looking at how does this impact me, right? Like, because this constant rejection most likely feeds into something that I know well, right? It's familiar, like what we were saying earlier. And I would be curious as a therapist, how I play into that pattern myself. Does that make sense?
You as a therapist would have that person ask themselves, how am I playing a part in this?
Right. So if I was a therapist of that person,
Right.
I would help them come into contact with the place inside of them that's being impacted by what's happening. And I would really, because I mean, first of all, you know, I think it can be so discouraging, right? To like be rejected again and again, and spend some time just healing that, like spend some time witnessing that part and giving it a lot of compassion, And by doing that, also understanding how this is familiar, how this is probably a pattern that, has been there even earlier on in life. And I think by just like kind of going in that place and working with that, we can probably start shifting things.
Hmm.
So in other words, by unburdening some of the negative beliefs or emotions that are held in the body, we already help something to shift in the person's system.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. You're already interrupting the pattern by turning attention in on itself rather than
Right.
getting back on the app or disassociating by some other means.
Yeah, because my guess would be that the person who's experiencing that rejection is internally doing the same with themselves, right? I imagine that there is a right. It's hard if you're not consciously doing it to actually love that little boy or that little girl who's being rejected again and again, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I remember you introduced me to parts work back almost 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago. And I remember my first feeling was I had heard people use this kind of language like, oh, your inner child or whatever. And I didn't pay any, it didn't make any sense to me. I didn't give it any credit. It's nothing I had ever heard before. And it has been the most impactful, just speaking for myself, that is like the lays the foundation for all of my developmental work. There's nothing really for me more foundational than that notion. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering what you might say to somebody who has a similar level of skepticism, because you've mentioned it now a few times, the parts, and it's a big part of the
Yes. Yeah.
course. What might you say to somebody who's highly skeptical of the idea that they have different parts inside of themselves?
I think it's great to be skeptical. It's healthy. I was very skeptical of this myself at first when I heard of parts. I was like, I don't have any parts. What is this about? I was very resistant to the idea. And I think it's part of the experience. If someone feels a resistance towards the idea, I would invite them to get curious, maybe. I think being skeptical is great. It means that, you're thinking for yourself, you're allowing yourself to disagree, which I love that. Um, but also, can you do that and also stay curious? Stay curious to maybe having an experience and notice things shift inside of you. And for me, that's really what did it, right? I was feeling like really skeptical of that whole thing. And then because I had to in some ways, going through like my master's degree and all of that, go through that experience again and again. And I was like, I don't really want to recognize it, but something's happening here, right? There's all that emotion and that like all those things are moving inside of me. And I just had to recognize that despite my strong desire to not buy into it, something was really happening. And I think there is no better proof than just your own experience. So my invitation would just be to stay curious and in the class, in the program that we're doing together, there will be a lot of experientials. So a lot of opportunities also to try that for yourself.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the class. So, can you say a bit more about what you have planned for the course, so people will be able to
Sure.
experience the parts and what else?
Yeah. I think what I'm really excited about this course is like the opportunity to really bridge the differentiation model with the attachment model. I don't know if that speaks to you or if you want me to like speak a little bit more about what that is.
Please elaborate.
Okay. So, and here I'm talking more specifically about like couples work. But whether you're in a relationship or not is kind of irrelevant as long as you're interested in being in we're all in relationships, right? Whether it's with our friends or roommate or colleagues or, our parents. So it's not so much a matter of like being in a being partnered romantically with one or more people, but just in terms of being in a relationship, the differentiation model has really much the focus on being yourself and the ability to be authentic and to be kind of your own individual, right? That's one part of the spectrum. I would argue that IFS is on the differentiation part of the spectrum.
That's internal.
Bruce Stiff, yeah, exactly, internal family system, the parts work. Bruce Stiff, that I think you quite like is also in this differentiation model, right? On the other side is the attachment model, which is the model that is more about co-regulation, that is more on the point of view that we're social creatures and that we are, that takes into account how we can regulate our nervous systems together. These are two very different school of thoughts. And what's interesting is that they both have very interesting pieces of the puzzle. And I think they work best hand in hand than just one or just the other. So I'm actually trained in both. And with experience now, I'm able to see what's needed when. And that's what I'm really excited to actually bring here is, some very concrete tools and exercises so that we can like dive into the feel of each and also really get a sense of like what's needed when.
Hmm. And from what I understand, you're one of very few people that are creating this bridge or working with these two specifically.
That I know of. But yeah, I think people tend to be of one school or the other. Um, I wouldn't say I'm the only one, but I think there's something quite unique in how I bridge the two together for sure.
Yeah, well, you've certainly had a unique impact on my life, and I've been singing your praises for many years, and I'm very excited to be producing this event and telling all my friends about it, and hopefully this video will help spread the word.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. It feels really like an honor to, be doing this with you and having all of your support. So I really appreciate that.
Beautiful. Talk to you later, Claire.
Talk to you later.